Welcome. Thank you for coming. Hope everybody had enough to eat. I work for Northwell Health, and I'd like to tell you a story about how we improved our clinical viewer environment. The aim of the presentation is basically to tell you how we assessed our current environment. I'm going to tell you about the project itself, what we ended up with, and what we did to ensure that what we promised functioned before we went live. So I was going to get into the size of the company, so when we talk about numbers and the request, you see where it's coming from. But the CTO, Vish, already went through this. So, Northwell has multiple facilities. It spans over a rather large environment, and there's different types other than hospitals. We have research, we have institutions, laboratories, emergency care. So there's a lot of different type of requests that we get for our data. And at Northwell, we have a concept of, instead of trying to implement a new EMR at every facility that we take over, we try to keep the data the same and have them keep their EMR and integrate it into the data. So it supposedly saves them millions of dollars for doing that, and people are used to the same EMR, so there's no training, et cetera. So I was sitting at my desk, minding my own business, when the director of HIE comes up to me, invites me to a meeting, and I knew it was something big when I was in the conference room. There's like 15 people. Fish was on the conference call. We had our consultants on the conference call. InterSystems was there. And we received a project to integrate our clinical viewer into one of our largest EMRs. So apparently there were over 25,000 clinicians using this EMR, and we need to sustain 1,500 concurrent user sessions. That's people sitting there pounding away at the same time. So the first thing we did was conduct a baseline, and we found out we could only support 75 concurrent users. So what we did to get us to that point is basically the premise of this presentation. But before I get into exactly what we did, I just want to make sure that everybody understands the architecture that we had to deal with. So as everybody knows, I'm going to go over this real quick. It's CacheDB, the Ensemble framework sits on CacheDB, and the components that we looked at is basically within the HIE component. I know I'm going to fall down on that thing. And the CSP gateway is actually a separate entity within the same server where Cache resides. I mean, this is pretty much common knowledge. So we looked at all the different components to see where was the best way to reach our goal of 1,500 concurrent users. And the first place that we looked at was the access gateway, but of course we looked at the registry, the edge, and the bus. So this is a diagram of our the clinical viewer environment. And as you can see, there's two different ways of accessing the clinical viewer. And the way we had it set up is we had high availability in one data center, and then we had our DR in another, which consisted of 4 different machines, but only one machine was being used at a time. So immediately, we were looking at what we can do to utilize all 4 of these machines, because when we were doing our testing, the contention was definitely on the access gateway. So the testing needed a huge amount of teamwork, and I'm very happy to say that a lot of people that helped me are here today. So the faster I get through this presentation, maybe if you guys have any questions, maybe you can come up and even meet the people who helped us out. So some of the people who helped us out, and one of the biggest challenges of doing this was corralling all these experts, people that knew far more than I did about their individual thing, like the person who did the single sign-on, the CSP gateway specialist, clinical viewer developers, et cetera. So one of the main tools that we use to do our baseline, to anytime we saw a breaking point and we wanted to test it after we thought we fixed it, was LoadRunner. It was a huge monumental tool that helped us to achieve our goals. And the way we had it set up was we had 35 workstations set up within our environment with 300 distinct Active Directory users, was we use Active Directory, which basically is LDAP, and we had 100 test patients. And this is a typical report that we would get to see how we were doing. So early on, like, we had 15 users compared to 155 users, and one of the things you look at is like the standard deviation between what we had at 15 and what you had at 155, because you wanted to make sure as you're scaling up and you're increasing the load, that everything was still performing properly. And we had a whole script of what we thought was how the doctors and clinicians would use the clinical viewer, and that's what the load runner was running. And another huge challenge in which we tapped into a lot of the HIE experts was to ensure that the SDAs that were pumping through the test were staying the same, because we were using a stage environment, and the stage environment was actually building as we were testing. And if the test got skewed with heavier SDAs, then we weren't really comparing apples to apples, and that was a really big challenge too. And we had a lot of help with that. So the tests, like I said, having all the people and all the experts involved, it was really, one of the challenges was trying to keep track while the test was running to see where the breaking points were, because at the time of the breaking point, it was crucial for us to see what was happening. And I just put in a few screenshots just to show, like what the tests were like. So this is like what it looked like the test on Windows. We used Perf Monitor. There's the load runner test. So it was really crucial to make sure that we had the information of what happened at that particular time. So one of the things that we did was we would record every session with WebEx, and we would have a group chat going. So if there was like 15 people on the call, if something that they thought was worth noting would come up, instead of interrupting the call, they would just shoot it up on the group text and it would have a timestamp. It seems trivial, but it saved us a lot of time, because each one of these tests took hours to ramp up. And if someone wasn't there or we needed to review it, we just went back to a recording. It helped out. One more slide. Forgot about that one. So the tools that we used to look for breaking points, because we use AIX at our facility, and but we also have Windows machines involved, and I'll get into that. So we look for, these are the commands that we use. I'm not going to go through every single one of them. Last time I did at a practice thing, everybody started taking out their phones and stuff, so I won't bore you guys. But when you want to go back and see the commands, these are them to look at memory, CPU, and all that. So with Windows, we use perfmon. And again, I mentioned here the WebEx and the chat tools. So again, here's some of the commands that we ran. The internal commands was, the other challenge too was to make sure that the test was actually running properly, right? Because instead of sitting there wasting hours thinking that the test was running, how do you really know? So we used internal cache commands to make sure that the amount of global references were being used, and the writes were keeping up. So, and the test basically took like over 8 months until we finally got a stable environment. So this is what we ended up with. So instead of having one system, we broke it up into 4, spanning 2 data centers. The key component that made this happen was the load balancer. We used a RHI VIP that was capable of routing the packets between 2 data centers. That was the key. At Northwell, we use NetScaler. I've had the experience with F5, A10 a little bit, but they're all basically the same. And what you see here is we actually split the CSP gateway from the cache DB instance, right? So basically our database application server stood on AIX, and we offloaded the CSP gateway. It was a huge improvement in performance. And our first real test was when the EMR needed to be upgraded. And as you can see, one of these dots represent, like I said before, there's 2 ways of it being accessed, through the SSO gateway or directly to the clinical viewer. And the brown line shows that the SCM was down, the EMR was down, and people had to directly access the system. So this was one of our first. And as you can see, It's constantly being used, you know, up until today, and you know, it's increasing. And to be honest with you, at any given time, we pretty much only have 3 nodes up, because we designed it as a 3+1. So having that environment now, we could do upgrades in the middle of the day. If we think there's something wrong with one of the boxes, you take it out of the cluster, you could test it, work on it, you know, make sure it's okay before you put it back in. So that's it. Any questions? Yes.
So you said the project took about 8 months.
Yes, sir.
Did you think it would take that period of time at the beginning? Was there some expectation of how long it would take to configure and test?
We really didn't think it was going to take that long. The testing, every time we hit a hurdle, right, we had to, you know, fix it. We had to address the issue and then retest. And and each test took like hours to ramp up, and then allocating the resources to be on the phone while we were doing it, that's what really took a bulk of the time. You know, that's what, and also being a large company, you know, requisitioning the hardware and, you know, doing that also took a while also. Any other questions? Yes, sir. What operating system do you use? Use Linux, okay, yeah. We had some kind of problems also running the CSP gateway on AIX. That was one of the issues. Once we reached like 800 concurrent users, which is a huge amount, right? We started seeing issues with it. And the code base on Linux and Windows is much better. And you know, some of the work happens on the CSP. XML parsing, right? You know, that's another part of it too. But I'm sorry? Yeah, but you see, also a lot of the sessions would occur, and it would handle on the CSP gateway, right? So if you want, we could talk more about it afterwards. I could show you things that we did, and you know, I have a lot of reports. So thank you for your question. Anything else? Anybody else? Any questions? Do you have any questions about the VIP that we used? Because like, you're familiar with the VIP when it comes to like mirroring, right? The VIP that we use, the load balancer, is when we first started implementing and talking about it with management and other people, they were concerned that implementing a load balancer would be adding another layer. But the load balancer really isn't. It's more like a switch than it is a computer. So it really does its job as far as, you know, improving the environment and increasing the load. And the RHI was the real key that made us utilize both data centers. So I guess that's it.